And we continue tonight with our focus overseas while we continue to get distracted by domestic political nonsense. There's major things happening in the Middle East, specifically with Iran. Let's bring in Lisa Daftari. She, of course, the editor in chief of the Foreign Desk and a passionate advocate for the freedom seekers in Iran. Lisa, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, let's start with the protests that still do continue in Iran, but it looks like the government is getting even more ruthless in their crackdown. What's happening?
Right, which only indicates how successful this revolution has been. The fact that the mullahs are truly just frustrated, if lack of a better word, because they're just cracking down on women going to school without their hijabs, women coming out into the marketplace without their hijabs, women going to the bank without their hijabs, and it's not just the women; it's also the men. So even though we're not seeing protests daily, they're still in that revolution mode or that momentum. It still carries forth, which only tells us that this revolution has, in fact, been successful in many ways. They haven't removed the dragon's head. They haven't been successful in regime change, but they have been successful in telling the government and telling the world that they will not be held back. They will not be repressed. They will not be told how to dress or what to do or how to live. And they're willing to pay the consequences. Look at the thousands of young people who are being detained still in the prisons in Iran, but also those who have been killed and executed. For what? Showing up at a peaceful protest, honking their horns in protest of those who are in support of those who are protesting, you know, posting something on their Facebook pages, being an athlete who uses their platform to advocate for the people of Iran. So that's what we're seeing right now in Iran.
We are, and and at some point, it certainly seems like it's potentially reaching critical mass where the religious police, the people who are patrolling the streets trying to enforce these hijab laws, they can't. They're overwhelmed because so many are defying these laws. So, how does this eventually translate into some sort of political change in Iran?
Yeah, really the best question. And you really hit the nail on the head, Larry, when you talk about that tipping point being whether it's the police, the military siding with the people and turning over and allowing society to really fight the government. Look, the people don't have guns. It's very difficult to say that they will be able to take over the regime without some sort of catalyst, without some big major change. And we know we're not going to get that from Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
The people on the streets are calling out for help from the Biden administration, and so far they have not gotten that help. And not only that, but this week, the Biden administration admitted that they are interested in getting back into some sort of deal with Iran's regime. That is not what the people want to hear. That would only loosen this noose around the neck of the Iran regime that the people have created. It will give them the breathing space, the economic space to stay in power.
Yeah, I saw that story go by, and I'd love for you to explain it to me, or at least give us the details. There's no explaining
Right.
what the Biden administration is attempting to do here. Several months ago, it looked as though Iran had shown themselves to be the international pariah that they are, and so
Right.
all of these Iran nuclear deal talks were finally off the table. But now the Biden administration wants to work out some kind of quasi interim deal without any sort of real scrutiny. What is that?
Exactly. Yeah, not only that, but they have found creative ways, the Biden administration I'm talking about, has found creative ways of loosening funds to the tune of $500 million dollars to go back to Iran's regime through Iraq already. They have found ways of loosening the sanctions in certain sectors and then talking about sanctions in other ways that have not been enforced. So, really, just podium talk. But just to focus on the Iran nuclear deal, the reason it didn't work out is not because of the bad behavior of Iran's regimes or the protesters over the last 6 months telling us not to make a deal with Iran's regime, but because Iran's regime at the negotiating table was not being a good partner. They were asking for too much, and the US, as much as they wanted this deal, they could not make those concessions. And so they walked away little by little. And each time they were really hoping to go back to Vienna to get that deal, and it just didn't happen. Fast forward, you have the last 6 months of protests, and of course, the optics are just too egregious for Washington to get back into that deal. So they created some space. And people would say, and I would hear all of these commentators and analysts say, Washington and the Biden administration, they don't have an Iran policy. And I would always correct them and say they do have an Iran policy. This is their policy. The reason they're not talking about regime change, the reason why Rob Malley, who's the Iran envoy from Washington, D.C., the reason why Blinken and all the rest and Biden will not talk about regime change and they have rejected that idea is because they were hoping to eventually normalize relations and get that deal. And here we are today. That's exactly what they have admitted to. They want to get back into some sort of deal, even if the Iranians are not putting up with their side of the deal, even though they're not making those concessions, even though they're not allowing us to get into those nuclear sites, even though we know that they're enriching uranium between 60 and 84%, even though we know they're going after weapons parts, they're selling weapons to Russia, they're dealing with China. There's so much going on. And just to connect the dots for you, Larry, we
Yeah.
know that Iran's regime is pouring billions of dollars into global terror. They're going after US assets in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. They're giving tons of weapons and financial funding to Hezbollah and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So we ask, why is our taxpayer money, why is our government going after a deal with such
Yeah.
bad acts?
Good question. Why this craven desperation among the elite diplomatic class of the left in Washington, D.C.? Why is this their white whale? Why must they make some sort of agreement with known terrorists?
Right. And you know what? The answer that I can only come up with is that this is a continuation of the Obama foreign policy, which is to make nice with our enemies, to go on that apology tour. And you know what? So much for, a
Yeah,
political class that prides themselves on social justice and women's rights and gay rights and all of these other human rights. And then to watch the people of Iran get slaughtered because they're gay, get slaughtered because they're women who are coming out without their hijab, who are being rounded up just for peaceful protesting. And here we are,
yeah.
Biden's administration trying to cut a deal with them.
Yeah, we've had kinder words to say for the Iranian government that we have for Netanyahu's new government that he's formed in Israel right now. I mean, that really does tell you what the priorities are in this administration.
Right, and such a dishonest way of dealing with these leaders, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And that's a great juxtaposition, Larry, because Bibi Netanyahu, what he's going through right now, love him or hate him, those are domestic issues. It will not change U.S. policy with Israel one iota. It will not
That's
change our relationship with them. It's none of our business what's going on over there. And people
right.
can opine, but it's none of our business what goes on
Right.
day to day in Israel.
It doesn't affect the balance of power there in the Middle East. It doesn't affect oil production. It doesn't affect our relationship with Jordan or the conflict in Syria or Saudi Arabia. But this is what they're obsessed about what
Obsessed.
Netanyahu's doing with his judiciary.
Because it's a personal vendetta against Bibi, continuation of Obama's vendetta against Bibi, and that is, I mean, if you're studying what's going on inside Israel, they're trying to create a balance of power. They're trying to create checks and balances, which they do not have. And in being a true democracy, that's what they're going for. It's a fight between left and right because the left has had a monopoly over the judiciary, and they don't want to give that up. That's
Yeah,
exactly what's happening. Very similar to what's going on in this country. But for Biden, for Kamala to chime in and to call out Bibi, none of our business. But then again, making nice with these mullahs who have blood on their hands. They have American blood on their hands. Imagine 83 attacks on US assets only since Biden has been in office and letting that slide just to get that handshake with the mullahs.
yeah. Quickly, Lisa, if you could just shed a little light on this really disconcerting story that I've seen. This is an ongoing story regarding attacks on school children, poison attacks that have resulted in now 20 Iranian schoolgirls hospitalized. What's at the bottom of this?
Yeah, symbolic attack on students being at the helm of this protest, being the helm of this revolution, really giving that, serving up that proverbial slap on the wrist, and in a much more serious way
Hmm.
to show that this will not be tolerated. They also came out this week and said girls who do not wear proper Islamic headdress that attend school will not be allowed to enter school. They're taking a page from the Taliban in Afghanistan and denying women education just for not wearing their headscarves properly. Look, this is a society that has truly, I mean, it's never matched up to this type of theocratic radical government, but more than ever, they have come out ever since 2009 with the Green Revolution. They really put themselves on the map to say, look at us, we're modern, we're educated, we deserve better than this. And now to go after those school children who are really just using their voices, being brave, speaking out, and facing the consequences,
It's just
unfortunately.
an evil government, and it's been so for decades now. And the fact that this administration can't recognize it, while, as you say, they wave the banner of human rights around the world, is baffling and enraging. Lisa Daftari, thank you as always for joining us. There's more to come. Keep it here on Salem News Channel.